What's happening, guys? Welcome to another huge episode of Triggered. A lot is happening, folks. A whole lot. I'm going to give this a couple minutes to build up because there's too many things going on. We got to cover it. I want to make sure everyone sees it. I don't want to have to repeat myself or have people complaining in the feed that they missed it. But a lot's happening. I think McDonald's is perhaps as part of the MAGA movement as it's ever been. And I want to start by addressing some confusion. Make America Healthy Again is starting today. Okay, it was a thing. We may have taken a little bit of a break from it over the weekend with Bobby Kennedy at like 3 a.m. Flying back with Elon Musk, Bobby, my father, me, Speaker Mike Johnson. Sort of an eclectic group, a total mix, but we had a late night McDonald's run, and people, I think it's like my largest post on Instagram ever, now almost 1 million likes. People going out of their mind that Bobby may have had McDonald's once. Listen, I get it. I love everything that he's doing. You can have like a McDonald's once in a while. Like it's not the end of the world. Like it's like they say about veganism, right? You can be a vegan, like you don't actually live longer. It just feels that way. Sometimes you have to just live a little bit. I know I had perhaps the most famous McDonald's meal of all times. I mean, I don't think it's quite as viral as maybe some of the meals that my father had, but since he wasn't actively eating McDonald's when he was a fry cook there, I'm going to say that this is probably the most viral McDonald's eating session of all time after the fight on UFC. We promise, guys, I promise we are going to make America healthy again. I promise, okay? But like, every once in a while, you're a cheat day. I didn't know, the last time that Bobby Kennedy had McDonald's and a full sugar Coca-Cola, which is probably actually healthier than the diet version, in all fairness. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the excess sugar. I try not to drink my calories, but like, probably actually healthier than the chemicals they use for the artificial sweeteners, but minor details. I don't know when the last time he had either one of those things was. I'm not sure when the next time is. The guy is, jacked. He's in good shape. He takes it seriously. I'm also not sure if anyone expected Speaker Mike Johnson to be taking selfies with Kid Rock and Jelly Roll. So there's a lot going on right now. But we are in the midst of a new MAGA cultural movement. And we are definitely making McDonald's great again, at least for the weekend. And now we're back to making it healthy, but so much more going on. Also coming up, we'll be joined by former House Speaker, the one and only Newt Gingrich. Obviously, a lot going on with the complexities of cabinet picks and how that plays out, especially with tight margins in the Senate. You have tight margins in the House. How are we going to get this mandate over? The reason we have tight margins in the House, I spent quite a bit of time talking about that with the current Speaker of the House, this weekend on the way up to the flight, and it's basically because the Democrats, whether it's weaponized Act Blue or whatever, spent on average 3 to 5 times more on some of these House races, so they were able to get some of their clowns over the line. But anyway, I'm looking forward to it. Newt's always a great visionary. He understands. This is someone who gets it. He understood the MAGA movement early. He was the guy that sort of really helped me out in my 2016 RNC speech that kind of put me on a political, path. So just, a great guy to be talking about all of these things. So guys, in the meantime, make sure you are liking, sharing, and subscribing, okay? It's so easy to do. Just do it right now so you don't miss these major episodes. Download the Rumble app. And if your friends still aren't watching us, now is a great time to start. We have a front row seat to a change in history, to really fix the disaster that is the American political system, as well as government, etc. So now's a great time. Remember, you can also get Triggered on Spotify. You can get it on Apple Podcasts. If you miss the show here on Rumble, or if your friends get their podcast that way, make sure they are checking it out. For all of the top headlines here, since we are in sort of the innovative business, the stuff we cover here, all on my news app, MXM News. If you want to get into the details of that, like minute by minute, MXM, where you can get the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. Guys like me, people always say, oh, you don't like it, XYZ? Like, go build your own. Like, we actually do that. But we need you guys to help support those kinds of things so that we can continue to do that, because it doesn't just happen magically, unfortunately. I wish I could, miracle this shit into existence, but that doesn't actually happen. So we have to actually work We have to put in our own capital, blood, sweat, and tears. We have to get other people involved and in on it. So if you guys can support us, that would be incredible. And again, it's how we grow the movement. Before we get into these top headlines, also remember to check out some of our great sponsors like Tax Network USA. But first, you got to make sure you don't owe back taxes. And if you do, or if you still have them out there, if you still have unfiled tax returns, if you've missed the deadlines to file for an extension, don't be blindsided by the IRS and their heavy-handed tactics. Hopefully we can make them fair and equitable, but that's not the case right now. Okay? You could face wage garnishments, frozen bank accounts, or even property seizures if you haven't taken action yet. So like I always say, I simply want you to be prepared. Tax Network USA has helped taxpayers save over $8 billion in tax debt and has filed over 10,000 tax returns. So visit tnusa.com/Don Jr. for a free consultation. tnusa.com/Don Jr. That way you also know where they're coming from, but you get your free consultation that way as well. Check them out, hear them out, make sure you don't have any of these things out there. Remember, don't trust the IRS. Don't think you can do it yourself. They are not your friends. Check out tnusa.com/DONJR. They'll help you out. And now, let's get into the top headlines. Again, over the weekend, I was at the UFC at Madison Square Garden, and we rolled out with quite a squad. Then we met up with an even better squad when we were there, but, you know, all friends. Let's just say, even the leftist media could not say there was a single boo or negative comment in the House. Remember, this is Madison Square Garden in the heart of New York City. What they used to do was it would be an epic entrance. People would be screaming, and they'd find like one libtard that would be sitting there and booing into his phone while videoing it, so it sounded like there were actually boos, but no one else actually heard them. Not even that happened this time. The squad was rather unique. When was the last time you had the Speaker of the House and future Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, walk out into an MMA event together with the President-elect? I don't think it's ever happened. I think that's probably rather new. I'm not even sure those people have ever been at sporting events together. CNN, of all places, had the best description of UFC 309. This is hard to believe. Check it out.
Like ancient Rome here. This is sort of a conquering Republican Caesar who's going into the Colosseum, and everyone's cheering, and he's got his political gladiators with him. That appearance isn't just about him enjoying the applause. He's sending a message to the Senate.
For sure.
Like, not only are you entertained, but these are my people, and are you willing to fight? Because here's who I have.
And are any of us...
Are you not entertained, folks, to quote the great Gladiator movie? But honestly, I think it is an apt description. You hear all the stuff going on about the Senate, and the Senate, you know, sort of, generally speaking, the place where conservatism goes to die, or the stuff that we actually want gets killed. I think there's a mandate now. I think it's clear from the people. I think it's clear for the people that my father got over the line. Now, I think all of that new incoming freshman class is actually great in the United States Senate. I think they're going to be rock stars. I helped them all. They're going to be great, but you still have to deal with the establishment folks that are there. But they have to understand what the will of the people is, and hopefully this gets them to understand that. The arena was absolutely electric. John Jones, if not the greatest of all time, certainly one of the GOATs, even he was doing the Trump dance. And then he gave my father his belt. And of course, there was the McDonald's photo heard around the world. It was a delicious, though perhaps not all that healthy meal. Not as healthy as it could be. Maybe we'll fix that with RFK. Maybe we go back to the beef tallow rather than the seed oils to fry the fries. I almost thought the McDonald's fries of my childhood were actually significantly better, and I'm old enough, unfortunately, because I'm old as dirt, to remember the original McDonald's fries, and I remember there distinctly being a change. And it actually was supposed to be because it's healthier. It turns out that's not the case. So even McDonald's, in my opinion, will be healthier than ever before. And not just McDonald's, but Fruit Loops too, folks. Another staple of my childhood. Turns out I was poisoning myself and perhaps my kids, although I try to avoid giving that crap to my kids. Just don't forget to let the New York Times know. Because the New York Times, in their infinite wisdom and fact-checking ability, put out perhaps the most ridiculous fact check in the history of fact checks. Maybe the most ridiculous one ever by like a lot this weekend. And it read, and I quote, talking about Bobby Kennedy and him talking about these things, and it said, and I quote, Mr. Kennedy has signaled out Fruit Loops as an example of a product with too many artificial ingredients, but he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same, although Canada's talking about roughly the same as Canada's because there's different ingredients in Canada and the UK because they won't allow poison in their food. Back to the quote. Although Canada's has natural coloring made from blueberries and carrots, while the U.S. product contains red dye 40, yellow dye 5, and blue dye number 1, as well as butylated hydroxylene, or BHT, a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness according to the ingredient label. Yeah, they're basically the same, other than the freaking chemicals that are poisoning us. I mean, think about that. I mean, they tried to say so Canada uses blueberries and carrots to dye the Fruit Loops. We use that shit that I can't even pronounce. But, other than that, they're basically the same. Like, no shit. Like, are these people out of their minds? Oh, so it's basically the same as Canada, except for a few minor chemicals and dyes that are literally banned in Canada because they are poisoning people. I mean, think about this. This is the not very biased, totally objective New York Times. Also, let me tell you something. When your ingredients are called things like yellow 5, it's probably not ideal for you, as opposed to like using, a yellow or an orange, found in carrots. I don't know. That's just me. But, I was the guy that was a conspiracy theorist, probably also according to the New York Times, for being like, you think maybe the Wuhan lab virus started in the lab that studies the exact virus that became the pandemic in Wuhan, China, which happened to be ground zero for the... You think maybe it came from there? No, how dare you say that, Don? You're a terrible human being, and you're not a virologist. You don't have to be a virologist, folks. You just have not to be a moron. These are, of course, very minor details. It's like saying, you know what, the weather is basically the same here in Florida as it is in New York, except for, I don't know, snow and cold. Oh, and one state gets hurricanes, but it's basically the same. I mean, other than that, other than those minor details, like, that are not so minor, they're basically the same. So what is the New York Times talking about? It's delusional. And speaking of delusional, the nonstop shrieking from the media and Democrats show that Matt Gaetz is ready to restore some credibility through the Department of Justice. In fact, CNN again reported that DOJ officials, and I quote, believe the Gaetz pick raises the likelihood that there will be more departures from the DOJ, and a staffing firm that moves lawyers out of government into private sector jobs said they have been inundated with calls since the Gaetz announcement. I mean, I sort of liked where he was on policy. Like, you already had me there. Someone who would actually take on the swamp creatures, someone who would break up the bureaucracy, someone who's been targeted by them and who's been a vocal proponent of all of the things that we're doing when they targeted us. We're already draining the swamp, folks, before my father's even taken power. Here's Molly Hemingway on Fox explaining why Gaetz is the right man for the job.
Nominated for this position because we have a problem at the Department of Justice. For the last 8 years, they have run roughshod over rule of law in this country. They have prosecuted political opponents. They ran the Russia collusion hoax. And too many people in Washington, D.C. did not stand up against what was happening there. And many Americans are upset about it. Matt Gaetz is one of the most effective people at fighting that Russia collusion hoax and other information operations, whether it was the Brett Kavanaugh information operation, the Donald Trump Russia collusion hoax information operation, or the one that is referenced here, which is something that the FBI and Department of Justice, which hate Matt Gaetz, looked into and cleared him of any wrongdoing. The idea that this is about the issue is corruption. It's the Department of Justice's corruption, and people are sick and tired of people in Washington, D.C. doing nothing as these people tried to destroy the country and getting upset at someone who actually might root out the corruption there. We don't have a Department of Justice. We have a Department of Injustice, and that's why you get Matt Gaetz as a nominee.
Guys, but the media hysteria didn't stop there. They're also worried about the future of the FBI, with CNN reporting that the Bureau is, quote, frightened of Kash Patel, writing, I quote again, he would be well positioned to try to investigate Trump's political enemies, declassify sensitive information, and purge career civil servants. Oh, really? Like, purging career civil servants, people who've weaponized their positions in government against the citizenry, the same people who declared concerned mothers at PTA meetings domestic terrorists, the same people who did the same domestic terror nonsense with people who bought Bibles and or MAGA paraphernalia. Investigate corruption? Oh no! Why would the FBI be so frightened about that, folks? It's almost like they've been functioning like a corrupt agency that actually needs investigation. It's almost like they're scared of what people might find. The fact is, we need a real DOJ and FBI to get them back to their true purpose. They have not been doing that. They have been functioning as political operatives of today's radical left. We also need a functioning DOJ so that Democrats don't just try to blatantly ignore the law. For example, Democrats have been openly breaking the law in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, to try to cheat for losing former Senator Bob Casey's Senate seat. Senator John Fetterman was confronted about it and essentially said, who cares if they're breaking the law? I mean, what difference does it make? It's Democrat power. Let them do whatever they want. I mean, this is how these people function. These are the people who've been controlling those three-letter agencies. These are the people who weaponized it. They got a court order from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they're like, doesn't matter. Who cares? The rule of law only matters when it can be weaponized against conservatives, not when it benefits Democrats. Check this out.
Behind Dave McCormick, Democratic officials in at least one key county, Bucks County, voted to count about 115 provisional ballots that are missing a signature, despite the Pennsylvania Supreme Court previously ruling that those are invalid. I want you to take a listen to how one Democratic Bucks County commissioner justified her actions.
I think we all know that precedent by a court doesn't matter anymore in this country, and people violate laws anytime they want. So for me, if I violate this law, it's because I want a court to pay attention to it.
So the Washington Post editorial board called that, quote, corrosive to democracy, unquote, and said, quote, county officials do not get to decide whether a legal requirement is material and must be followed. Courts do, and they have spoken clearly, unquote. What's your take? What's your response to that Democratic official deliberately announcing that they're going to defy court orders and count these provisional ballots?
Well, I'm not going to chase every kinds of quotes, things like that, because I think you just pointed out that it refers to about 115 ballots, and that's not going to have an impact on this race at this point. So where we are now? It's very, very close, and I guarantee you, if Dave McCormick were in the opposite situation.
First off, it's not just 115 ballots, and even if it was, you don't get to just create your own rules. They've been doing that for too long. I think the problem is they've been doing it for so long, they view it as precedent. Okay, they view it as precedence. They can just do whatever they want. If a Republican was doing this, remember, you're an election denier. All of these things that they call us. So when the Democrats are doing it, how come the media isn't outraged about it? It's like we've been playing different games for far too long, folks. But the good news is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court today put an end to this insanity, ordering that all 67 Pennsylvania county boards of election comply with their earlier ruling and shall not count misdated and undated ballots. This is a victory for election integrity and for the rule of law. And by the way, remember last week how Tony Blinken promised to send as much possible aid to the Ukraine on their way out the door as possible? I mean, let's make it really hard for Trump to achieve peace. Let's make it really hard. Let's just send them unlimited money so they can drag this out for years, and maybe you can get through 4 more years of Trump before you actually have to address any of this. Well, now, Biden has authorized Ukraine to strike Russian territory with American-provided missiles. deep into Russian territory. They were talking about things that could possibly extend into Moscow. I mean, think about that. They are trying to escalate this war as much as possible at the last minute to prevent peace. It's absolutely disgusting. I mean, if you have peace, the military-industrial complex can't get rich. So let's make sure we can have as much war as possible. Let's literally try to start World War III and instigate it so a couple people in the Beltway can get really rich while millions of people die unnecessarily. I mean, sounds like a great idea, folks. What could possibly go wrong? And it's yet another reason why we need to get these cabinet picks confirmed. And we're not letting the swamp in the Senate stand in the way. My message to Senate Republicans is don't be the place where America First ideas go to die. You only have control of the Senate right now because of my father, because he brought candidates over on their coattails. Some of you are up at 26. We'd love you to stay in the Senate, and if not, there may have to be a lot of primaries involved. John Thune needs to understand that as well. I know he's up later, but he has to understand this mandate. I'm hoping he accepts what the will of the people is. That has not historically been the case in the United States Senate, so hopefully he has learned from the mistakes of the past. You better make sure you confirm the Trump appointments. No more business as usual. Just get it done. And as I said earlier, we are in a MAGA cultural moment. For example, the NFL has gone from kneeling during the national anthem to doing the Trump dance, folks. The Trump dance. Not just one time, but I saw like 3 or 4 different games where guys, professional athletes are doing the Trump dance. MAGA is not the silent majority anymore, guys. The country is publicly embracing the movement like never before. It's a cultural phenomenon. We're watching it happen before our eyes. Like that. MAGA became cool. America First became cool. You saw it, whether it was John Jones or the NFL guys or the crew that we rolled in deep with, with Jelly Roll and Kid Rock and Triple H and Stephanie McMahon and the Speaker of the House and Dana White. Aiden Ross was there at UFC with us. The Nelk Boys, and John Shandy over there. Like, it was a crew. Elon Musk, at Tulsi Gabbard. This was a Bobby Kennedy. The list goes on and on. People get it now. America First is cool. For the record, America First was always cool. But a lot of powerful people with a lot of money to spend and a lot of influence tried to convince us that it wasn't. That is over, guys. It's back. And get this, guys. Biological and objectively attractive women are now allowed, once again, to win beauty pageants. It's hard to believe. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to believe. As the new Miss Universe from Denmark, shockingly, isn't fat, trans, or like some sort of other check mark. She doesn't check any woke box. It's shocking. I mean, for years we're getting dudes winning female beauty pageants. But perhaps this is a sign, guys, that the world is healing. This was an objectively attractive, I will not comment further because I just get myself into trouble, but like an objectively really attractive woman, and she was allowed to win a beauty pageant once again. We are back, folks. We are so back. It hasn't been 2 weeks, and the winning is non-stop. So I hope you're not tired yet, because the best is yet to come. And Newt Gingrich is coming up in just a few moments. But in the meantime, also check out one of our newer sponsors, 5G Free. Believe it or not, your everyday devices could be making you sick. From smartphones to Wi-Fi routers, radiation emitted from these technologies is an invisible threat. That's where 5G by Rumble comes in. From items to protect your home to the radiation emergency kits, they've got you covered. The kit helps flush harmful radiation from your system, plus you'll receive additional medications for added protection. Elevate your peace of mind with 5G Free, knowing that your choice supports a healthier lifestyle in a high-tech world. It's not about being extremist, it's about being prepared. Go to 5gfree.com/triggered and use promo code triggered at checkout to save 15% off of your order. Okay? Check them out. It's important. We cannot get away from this stuff, so we might as well take care of ourselves while we succumb to some of the inevitabilities of the modern world. So unless you live in a cave and are totally off the grid, you may want to check it out. And with that, joining me now, former Speaker of the House, author of March to the Majority, the one and only Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, and it's great to be with you. And it's amazing how much ground you cover.
Well, the reality is this. I think, Andrew Breitbart said it's sort of best. Like, politics is downstream of culture, and I think the Republican Party sort of often scoffed at that. They didn't try to get involved. They didn't try to do these things. They allowed the left to sort of pervasively take over education and pop culture and sports and even the upper echelon of law enforcement and the military. And we just sort of sat back there and were like, we're going to stand. Like, we had to get involved. And I think my father is one of the few guys that could actually do that. And, I don't know if you saw what happened at UFC this weekend or the NFL. I mean, the NFL perhaps is even, the UFC was different because it was always a conservative group. When you're a guy that gets in a cage to fight another man on your own, like, it's on you. You own that. It's an individual sport. You go in and perform. And I think that sort of aligns with the conservative mindset. The team sports, not as much. But watching the NFL players, score touchdowns or interceptions and do the Trump dance, multiple times. I mean, you got the Detroit Lions, you got the LA Raiders, you got the Titans, all guys doing it. That was amazing to see because now, for the first time in a long time, it's okay to be America first. That was like the permission slip for so many more people. So I imagine this is just the start. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that the election really mattered. When you talk to people and you think, what if Kamala had won? This country would have been down the tubes. And second, I think that your father's sheer courage, 9 solid years of campaigning, being shot, having lawsuits, being impeached, all that courage, just taking it and keeping on coming, has had an effect on a wide range of people. I just did a newsletter at Gingrich 360 about, which was inspired by you, by the way. I thought yesterday you holding the McDonald's French fries box on the airplane, it just suddenly all clicked for me that what you have with Trump is a different kind of cultural divide. It's a cultural divide of people who like sports, people who like winning. Remember, the big problem for liberals is if you're really into sports, you want performance, you want merit, you want to be able to win, you understand the difference between winning and losing. Now, you go to a place like Georgetown University where they, when your dad won, they had special rooms people could go to where they could have warm milk and cookies and they could have a blanket and they could feel sorry for themselves. Well, that is the opposite of competitive sports.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's a huge difference. I made a point that when Kamala Harris went on Saturday Night Live, she had 5.6 million views. But because the Trump campaign came in so fast, NBC decided they had to give him equal time, and the equal time they gave him was Sunday Night Football, which has 20 million views. So he got 4 times as many people as the person they were trying to help. And by the way, the people he was getting are the people likely to vote for him. And I think it's a pretty simple formula. And I think we're right at the edge of a dramatic break with what has been a very long period of left-wing values and left-wing ideas. And I think your point earlier, which some people may think is trivial, but it's not. If you actually go back, for example, to women playing in women's sports, that's a big break from where the left was trying to take us. And if you actually go back to the idea that America should be very careful and not just throw money around the planet, I don't know if you saw the picture today, which is a total embarrassment of President Biden in the back row while the president of China and the president of India are in the front row at this meeting in Peru. And you couldn't get a more vivid example of how far the Biden-Harris team has undermined America in the world. And as you know, when they have the next meeting, and President Trump is there, he ain't going to be back in the back.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's never going to happen. But it goes to show you. I mean, and I talk about it all the time, and I think people don't realize it. Like when America's not leading, when we exude weakness, the rest of the world sees it. They're going to capitalize on it. I mean, for China, for everyone, for all of our enemies especially, but for even some of those emerging economies, if America is weak, they're going to pounce and they're going to take advantage of it. And they have taken advantage of these last 4 years. I mean, I can't imagine a place where G7 countries and America's in the back row. That's insane. That's absolutely absurd. And yet it's happening before our very eyes. Everything that we've been talking about, you and I have spoken about this a bunch. Everything that we've been talking about, it isn't hyperbole. It isn't like it's 100% right, and it's happening before our very eyes. This today was a great example of it.
But it's very interesting the speed with which President Trump is making an impact. You already have the president of Ukraine saying publicly that they will get to peace faster with President Trump than they ever would have with President Biden. Now that is such a dramatic swing in 2 or 3 weeks' time, and I'm sensing it from friends all around the world that all of a sudden they're beginning to realize, oh, America's back. America's going to lead. America's going to be strong again. And I think the Trump presidency is going to be a presidency of work and achievement and success and prosperity. And that all leads people to decide around the world they'd rather be with us than against us. So I think this is a very historic moment that we're all in the middle of.
Yeah, I thought it was a really big deal. Obviously you saw, Qatar says Hamas is no longer welcome to safe haven here. Get the hell out. You saw that, what Putin said. Xi said, we want to normalize relations. Magically, all of a sudden they want to do that. I mean, we're winning before we've even taken office. But I think for me and for the people that I talk to, what I've noticed in the last 2 weeks since the election was, I went to, a local restaurant here and I'm sitting down and the owner literally comes up to me. He's like, thank you guys so much. We are now going to start an expansion. I go, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, we were talking about it, but we didn't think we'd be able to afford it. Now we're going to take that chance because we think we have the opportunity to actually succeed. It won't just be pulled out from under us. Like, people are going to take those risks that there's going to be something there for them. I mean, to me, that's the ultimate. When I see that, it's happened twice, actually. Hey, we're expanding. We're opening up another place. We're going to do this. And we were literally waiting for November 5th, the outcome of the election, to decide whether we were just going to cower in the trenches and just try to fight off the insanity, or whether we're going to build. Before my father even took office, they were like, hey, we now know we have a chance to succeed, so we're just going for it. I mean, that's about as America as it gets.
Yeah, and Clifton and I both had the experience of people who come up to us who felt like they were leaning over the abyss.
Yeah.
That if Kamala had won, they couldn't imagine the America that would have existed. And the level of emotion that we've been experiencing for the last week, the number of people who come up to us who we've never met before, but they've seen us on TV, they know we've been actively supporting President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
There's just this very deep emotional feeling that America has been saved and now has a chance to go out and create the kind of economy, the kind of prosperity, the kind of safety. That's what America should be all about. And I do think, Jack Kemp used to have this great line, and they say, well, how fast will supply-side economics work? He said, well, you drop $20 on the sidewalk, how long does it take somebody to pick it up? Because people respond. I think what you're going to see start to happen both in the U.S. and around the world is you have people looking up going, well, if President Trump's going to be back, now that's a different story.
Yeah.
And that both means that we're going to have more friends, we're going to have enemies who are much more cautious, and you're going to see entrepreneurs all over the planet. I mean, the Elon Musks of the world, and there are a bunch of them, are going to suddenly say, the place I'd like to invest is the United States. And that's going to be, I think, a generation of prosperity that's going to run on for a very long time.
Listen, I think you're 100% right with that. Now, I will say, my father can't do it alone, right? He's going to need help from the House, where we have a slim majority. He's going to need help from the Senate, getting some of the people who can actually effectuate that kind of change into his cabinet. So you wrote the book, literally wrote the book, March to the Majority. You did this yourself. I had a pretty stern message for the Senate in my opening. about sort of the mandate that the American people gave. The only reason we have a Senate majority is because good candidates, but the incoming freshman class, good candidates, I think they'll be great. But a lot of the guys that have been there for a long time, may not get that message. Can you talk about the governing principles for Congress moving forward? What's your message to the Republican leadership on Capitol Hill? Because, maybe you'll be a little bit more, I don't know, gentle than mine.
No. Look, when I was Speaker, we had the only 4 balanced budgets since the 1930s. We have got welfare reform with a Democratic president, and we split the Democrats. 101 in favor, 101 against. And the reason is simple. I studied basically 3 people, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. And there's a very steady pattern there. The key is to focus on the American people. If the American, and I'll say the first huge test is going to be the tax bill. If the American people decide that their future, their family, their budget demands that bill pass, you're going to see a bunch of Democrats, not just Republicans, a bunch of Democrats vote yes. I participated in '81 with Reagan when we passed the 3-year tax cut, the biggest ever done up to that. We carried 1/3 of the Democrats. Why? Because they go back home and a small businessman will walk up to them and say, you got to pass it. A local housewife would say, you got to pass it. And they got the message that there are these 2 futures. I get to vote yes and come back. I get to vote no and I'm going to get defeated. And I think the key for your father is going to be to triangulate where he reaches and arouses the American people. Reagan's phrase for it was, he said, I turn up the light for the American people, then they turn up the heat on Congress. And you'll be surprised over a matter of 6 or 8 weeks how many people who are never going to be for you suddenly go, well, I think that a little change here, a little change there. And then they get to the point where they say, I was really always with you. And I think that's the key. And I think the first huge test is going to be the tax cuts. And because they're the heart between deregulation and tax cuts. It's the heart of the Trump program for relaunching the American economy. If we get that passed early enough in 25, we're going to have a chance to really win in 26 in a way which will resemble President Roosevelt back in 1934. And that's vital. We cannot lose the House in 2026.
So, talk a little bit. I mean, I don't think the Republicans did us any sort of favors extending some of the CR stuff into next year rather than letting it be on Biden. So that we're stuck with the garbage of the last 4 years. I guess, when does it come up in June or something like that? What do you do about that? Because it sort of feels like that's a problem of the past that they're trying to stick with us, like Mitch McConnell in the Senate trying to fund Zelensky for 2 more years so that we can't possibly do anything, maybe, limit the purse strings a little bit to get him to the table, while the graft is rich on there. It feels like Republicans did a little bit themselves in allowing that to go on so long that hamstrings my father's ability to do some of the things that he needs to do. What are your thoughts on that? How do you handle that aspect of it? Because I think that's a problem as well.
But remember, unless it's in the Constitution, anything which Congress has passed and the President has signed can be repealed by the Congress passing it and the President signing it. So I would go through those things step by step. And in January, February, and March, whether I did it with a series of targeted bills or I did it with one big bill, I just go back through it. And I'll tell you, I've been talking recently with people who are going to put together the entire program for cutting spending. I am convinced that Vivek and Elon are going to come back very early with some proposals. And now you get to the American people. Gallup has reported that the average American believes 50% of all federal spending is waste. So you want to set up a series of votes and say, basically taunt them. You want to be the pro-waste senator? You want to be the pro-waste House member?
Yeah.
And
well, by the way, the numbers that are out there, it's probably more than 50% when I hear about that. And when I hear that there's entire buildings, government buildings, where no one shows up to work, they're working from home anymore. I'd like to find out how many federal employees that have full-time jobs at the federal government that no longer show up to work are working from home. I wonder how many of them are making extracurricular income. Maybe just saying, hey, you got to show up to the office 5 days a week. You can't just do it from home while walking your dog. I think you could probably get rid of half of the government just by making them actually do their damn job.
Look, I think I've said for years, there's a very simple test. Every time there's a big snowstorm, they announce in Washington that only essential personnel need to show up.
Yeah.
Now, I would say you take a list of the people who show up and say, okay, you must be essential. That means everybody who didn't show up is not essential. That should be a hint. Yeah. So you start there. But it's going to be much deeper than that. If you look at the decision that was made by the Supreme Court that said that bureaucracies can't invent law on their own, and I don't think anybody's done this yet, and it's something
That was Chevron, right?
yeah, what I'm hoping is that somebody's going to go through and say, given this decision, the following regulations are now no longer valid. Well, if those regulations aren't valid, why do we need the regulators? And you may be able to have literally a block elimination of entire bureaucracies and entire sets of regulations overnight on a scale no one has ever seen before. And that's really the meaning of that Supreme Court decision. It reversed years of turning power over to the bureaucrats and allowing the bureaucrats to make law, even though they're not elected and they don't exist in the Constitution.
Yeah, no, I think there's so much opportunity there. I know, I've been talking to, Vivek and Elon quite religiously, and these guys, they understand it, they get it, they see what's going on, and, I think they're going to be incredibly effective. That doesn't mean the swamp doesn't have teeth, but I think these are people that are actually willing to take those slings and arrows along with my father to get it done. And once they expose what's going on, the transparency, once people realize how broken and corrupt it is, that's when you're going to see real change, because the people, when they have the knowledge, are going to lose their minds at how their taxpayer dollars have been wasted.
There's a small group called OpenTheBooks.com, and they actually go and they measure everything. And for example, they find out how many people are being hired under this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. Mm-hmm. And they list who they are, what their salaries are, what their offices cost. And they really have an immense amount of information on just how much built-in embedded waste there is. And then you look at some of the contracts. Boeing recently was selling literally a coffee pot for the C-17 aircraft at 8,000% more than you could buy it at Walmart.
Yeah.
Now, there's something just profoundly wrong when these kinds of things.
Yeah, well, it's because they do cost-plus contracts. So they get a contract, and it's cost-plus. So there's no incentive to change anything. They just get a markup over the cost. So there's actually an incentive to have it cost more. And, everyone in the military, who, if it's a military thing, no one in the military is going to negotiate that because they want the board seat at Boeing later on. That's their off-ramp. So they just allow the waste to continue rather than have there be an incentive to save money or find a better way. There's incentives to have it cost more and take longer. And it's just absolute lunacy. You could never run a company this way. You'd be bankrupt in 2 weeks. But because we keep racking up, an insurmountable amount of debt almost, there's never been that incentive, and that's what needs to change.
That's right. And frankly, remember, when you talk about things like defense, we're talking about life and death. We're talking about whether or not we can keep up with China and whether or not we can cope with all the different kind of dictatorships around the world. This is not just some pork barrel game where the lobbyists get to make money and the corporations get to make money. Every time we have waste in the Pentagon, we are weakening America, and we are risking losing a future war. And I think that's a big, big decision.
Well, the Pentagon also failed its 7th audit. It's in a row. These are the people, they hired 86,000 new armed IRS agents to go after people. They say it's about billionaires, but honestly, there's not 1,000 billionaires probably in the world. You don't need 86,000 armed agents to go after them. They're going after people who spent $601 on their Venmo because that's the break line. But how do these people talk about these things and try to manage them if they're incapable of doing it themselves? I mean, this is dark money, slush funds. This is weaponized slush funds. I'm sure most of that money went to Ukraine to keep the wars and the endless wars going or elsewhere. But if the Pentagon can't fail an audit, how can they have an IRS that expects everyone else to be above board? I mean, it seems quite hypocritical to me.
Well, one of the nature of big governments everywhere in the world is that the rules never apply to them. I mean, given the way Elon Musk has saved enormous amounts of money at SpaceX and at Tesla and at X, I would not be at all surprised to have him suggest that they bring in all the auditors in the Pentagon and they say, guys, you have this great opportunity. 6 months from now, we will have a completed Pentagon audit, or we're replacing all of you with new people.
Yeah.
And that's incentive. I don't care how many hours a week you have to work. That's your incentive plan. You want to keep your job, get this done now.
Yeah, Elon's the perfect guy. I mean, I spent like quite a bit of time with him this weekend and over the last few weeks in transition meetings, and you hear him talk about. I mean, what he's done with SpaceX privately in a few years. He's got capabilities that NASA, with a 75-year head start and probably an infinite budget, essentially, isn't capable of doing. It's like, I want that guy, like, auditing all of these agencies. Imagine what you could do if you save $1 trillion or $2 trillion in the federal government, where you could put that. Like, we could actually, I don't know, educate our children, or maybe take care of our vets, or, have a non-crumbling infrastructure in our country. I mean, that's the difference. Instead, it's going to lobbyists and just being lost and wasted entirely, which is it's an incredible opportunity.
It is, and frankly, if you stick with Elon for just a minute, many years ago, Congressman Bob Walker and I introduced the first bill to create a reusable rocket. Put up $400 million. NASA hired Lockheed. They couldn't get the job done. About 15 years later, Elon comes along and he begins to invent reusable rockets. He reduced the cost of putting a satellite in space by 90%. It's the most deflationary single development in the last 20 years. Now he's packaging all of them together into the Starship, and the Starship is going to have 33 rockets in the first stage, 3 rockets in the second stage. It'll be the largest, most powerful rocket ever built, and my hope is that he's going to stick to a timetable he's announced, and in 2026, we're going to send the first 2 or 3 Starships to Mars carrying cargo to begin the process of setting up the equipment we need ultimately for humans to be able to live and work on that planet.
Yeah.
None of these things would happen without entrepreneurs. And that's the other thing I would say, Don, that so much fits your family. If we can liberate and arouse the entrepreneurial spirit of America, if we can get people who are excited to get up 7 days a week and go out and invent and create things, the kind of future we can create for our children and grandchildren is literally unknowable. It's going to be so amazing and such a remarkable chance. And I know that you feel the same. I have grandchildren. You have children. You want them to have the best future possible. And that means you need entrepreneurs, not bureaucrats, to invent the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge part of my focus is creating some of that parallel economy, getting away from the DEI policies of corporate America, creating things that are based on merit and actually efficient and all that. I mean, that's what I've spent when I wasn't campaigning. That's what I spent my last few years of my life actually doing. All now that I'm done campaigning, I can actually spend a lot more time on that. But it's 100% right. And it's guys like that are going to do it. But you can't. It was funny in talking with Elon. He actually said he was talking about some of the rockets and this. He goes, it took me less time to think of, design, and create the rocket than it did to get the paperwork from the government to launch the rocket. I mean, the permit to launch a rocket that a genius came up with and built and actually made work. The permit took longer. That was the stumbling block in the process. Like, think about that. You could invent and build a rocket faster than you could get the permit to actually test it. That was the perfect example of how insane. Like, that's something that should basically happen in about 3 seconds, maybe a day or 2. But it shouldn't be a process that takes years, and everyone has to chime in, and a bunch of pepper pushers who are doing nothing, making it impossible for geniuses like Elon to create. I mean, imagine what we've destroyed, that will for people to be that entrepreneurs because of the red tape. And if we can cut that, that's number one for me.
Yeah, I think actually, if you go back and look at the Reagan years, cutting the red tape actually has a bigger economic growth impact than cutting taxes. I think cutting taxes is very important, but if you can eliminate a lot of the red tape, and I think because we know more now, and because of the kind of leadership that your dad creates and the kind of people he's attracting, we're going to have a chance to have the greatest deregulatory experience, and that is going to liberate the economy in ways that people will look back 10 or 15 years from now, and they will think it was like a tidal wave of new ideas, new products, new services that raised the income and the quality of life for virtually every American.
Yeah, no, I think it's a once in a lifetime opportunity that we have right now, and it's not just my father. Now you have a team of people surrounding him that are on point, that are on mission, that aren't there to slow roll it, so we can get back to business as usual. And to me, that's the incredible opportunity. So there's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that goes something to the effect of, to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. I sort of feel like that sums up perhaps my father's relationship with Washington, as good as it gets. They tried to change him. They tried to make him something that was what they wanted, and it didn't work. What do you think about it?
Well, I wrote a couple of books on your dad when he first came out of nowhere and became president. And what I was struck with as I did the research, all through his career, he's been Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's been Donald Trump when it was good. He's been Donald Trump when it was bad. And he just kept being Donald Trump. And I think that's in a sense what Emerson's talking about. That you have this inner being. You have to be true to yourself before you can be true to anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think that we've seen a consistency with President Trump, who genuinely loves the country. As you know, when you're part of the family, he doesn't have to do any of this.
No, he had an easy life. He could do whatever he wanted. He could play golf all day. He could do whatever the hell he wanted. He was, I mean, it was actually a pretty good life. And I'm like, see, he didn't just go through 4 years of it in the presidency, and then there's 4 years of lawfare and trials, and they're trying to throw him in jail, and fake accusations from decades. I mean, I don't think,
and getting shot.
Yeah, the shot's kind of a big one. Hard to
I
believe.
remember
It's like
at one point, a couple of months back, when it was really tough,
Yeah.
I called and said, this is really difficult, and I'm really proud that you're, sticking to it. And he said to me, with a funny tone, he said, "What choice do I have?" I mean, it wasn't like he said, "Let's create the hardest possible game because I want to test myself," but he was in the process of saving the country, and if that meant you had to risk getting shot, you risk getting shot. That meant you had to go into a debate where the two moderators would be on the side of your opponent. You went into the debate. I mean, he's, as you know, because you've lived through it more than I have, he has consistently gotten up every morning and thought about saving this country and done what he had to do every day. And I am convinced that for the next 4 years, we're going to get the same service, the same courage, the same dedication, and that he is going to continue to attract absolutely first-class people who are going to collectively create for the American people a real opportunity to have a better future.
Well, listen, like when he got shot, fight. He doesn't stop. I saw him, before election night. I mean, I was with him. I saw him pull 2 all-nighters in a row. He's 78. Like, I was dying, and he's getting done with the second all-nighter after being up for 48 hours, and he's going on TV and then doing a whole day of. I mean, it's truly spectacular. I mean, it was just amazing to watch, and I guess. A lot of people ask me, well, why do you keep fighting? I'm like, well, if I don't, I'm probably going to end up in the gulags next to Elon and a couple of the other people. So I guess we didn't have a choice. But, dude, I'd love you to take us back to I guess it's the 104th Congress in the 90s, following your first 2 years as House Speaker. The Republican majority was reelected in the 1996 election. It's the first time the Republicans had done so in 68 years. What can current Republican leaders learn from your leadership then? I mean, I think you had a stronger majority. You didn't have a majority of 3 or 4, whatever we're going to end up with. They're still counting votes. I mean, 2 weeks later, they're still counting votes in some places because, we're a third world nation, essentially. But what do you think they can learn? What do you think the differences are, perhaps, between your majority and now? How can they get around that obstacle, et cetera?
Well, look, I think it's really, in a sense, the same advice I would give to all the new members of the incoming Trump administration. First, every time there's a special election, go all out, drown it with resources and personnel, and win it. We did that. We picked up 7 seats the first 2 years we were in office. Second, as I said earlier about Lincoln and Reagan and Thatcher, listen to the American people. The American people want the border controlled. The American people want inflation under control. The American people want economic growth. The American people want more energy and less expensive energy. You can go down a list like that. If we're doing what the American people want, and they know it, they're very likely going to give us a chance to serve them again. But it has to be a relationship I don't talk about communicating to the American people. I talk about working with the American people. And if we would learn to do that, and by the way, one of the things that President Trump has done that is truly heroic, and I've been active for a very long time in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
He brought in Latinos, African American males, in fact, also a number of African American females now. He brought in Asian Americans. He brought in working class whites. I mean, all of a sudden, you have a brand new coalition replacing the Roosevelt coalition. And that means Republicans, particularly traditional Republicans, have to learn that they're part of a new, bigger, and different coalition.
Yeah.
And that for some of them, that's going to be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, you were on this early. I mean, even back in 2016, you were talking about the sort of political realignment that was going underway. My father, rewrote that map. What other places do you see that realignment? I definitely saw it. I was saying, maybe not overall numbers, but per capita, over the last few months, I was taking more selfies when I'm at like an airport somewhere with African American men than anywhere else. I saw it. It was palpable. It's not like a one-time thing. Like I saw a couple more people at a rally. Like this was where they weren't expecting me, and they'd had enough. They'd seen that. Certainly seen the same thing with Latinos, and I especially saw it in some of the younger demographic that would never be Republican, and yet in some states we even won, but certainly on average across the country, getting 15% of the 18 to 29 would have been absolutely unheard of, and yet we did it. I mean, it's a new party. Make America Great Again is actually cool.
Well, I think two big examples. One, we found that an awful lot of suburban women who on the surface would say that abortion was the biggest issue, as they thought through how dangerous the world is. And I watched one of them on a program that I was watching that was interviewing people, and she said, look, when you start worrying about World War III and you start worrying about Russia and China and all these things, suddenly safety becomes the number one issue. And so we saw a much stronger vote among women for President Trump than anybody expected 3 or 4 weeks out.
Yeah.
And I think it was largely whether the safety was from illegal immigrants, as we've been watching in this terrible trial in Georgia, or the safety is from foreign countries, but a real change in that sense. I think second, what we've learned is that you have younger people who on the surface will tell you that they're green, etc., until you ask them, can you afford to buy a house? Can you afford to buy a car? Can you find a job? And all of a sudden the economy becomes a really big deal.
Yeah.
If we can be the party that delivers growth, lower costs, greater opportunities, that young people can afford to buy a house, that people in general can afford to live better, that people in the inner city are safer and don't have to fear what the weekend will be like in terms of killings, I think we could be a majority for a very long time.
Yeah, I guess, what does the Democrat Party do from here on out? I mean, they don't exactly have someone like a Tip O'Neill out there. I'm watching CNN in the days after the election, and I mean, they literally have people that are, I guess in their eyes, credible people saying, is screaming like lunatics, like, I don't care if you can't afford your groceries. We need, drive-through abortions, and we need 3-year-olds to be able to decide without parental consent to get gender-affirming care. I mean, do they learn anything from this? What do they do? Because it doesn't seem like they're learning. I'm sure a couple people will get it, but do they just continue to ostracize this at the levels that's the megaphone?
Look, I think you have a big fight inside their own party. You're going to have the wing that can't learn anything because they're ideologically so fanatically committed to a world that doesn't exist. And then you're going to have a wing that's more rational, more moderate, and they're going to be constantly beaten up and intimidated by the people who are nuts. And I use that term deliberately. I think you have to understand when somebody walks up to you and says, I really don't know what a woman is, and I really don't want parents to have any role in their child deciding to change their sex, and I really don't mind if men compete in women's sports and win all of them. You're dealing with people who aren't in very close touch with reality. And then when you hear people say, for example, from the river to the sea, and the truth is, if you went into these college campuses and said, which river?
Yeah. And which city?
Which sea? They wouldn't have any clue. They're just
No
chanting mindlessly. It's the decay of American education into sort of a social movement.
Yeah, I saw that during some of those chants. They put up a big banner and they spray paint, Palestine somewhere, but they misspelled it. Like, not exactly their finest. But Newt, earlier you mentioned Jack Kemp, and he once said, "We want peace with all our hearts, but peace cannot be achieved through weakness." Talk about the global effects of that. I mean, I guess it's sort of that, maybe even a Reagan-esque philosophy of, peace through strength, which I think we've, totally done without. Having the woke policies in our military, having, the insanity that we've seen there. How do we achieve peace through strength once again?
Well, let me say, first of all, we need a deep and thorough overhaul of both the Pentagon and the intelligence community. I think it's hard to overstate how much they've been weakened, starting with Obama and coming up through Biden. So I think that's a very important reform element for us to have any chance of survival. Mm-hmm. I've always told people that the key to understanding liberals is that, excuse me, they saw The Lion King. They thought that it was a documentary.
Yeah.
They think that lions and zebras sing and dance together. And when you try to explain to them that in the real world, lions eat zebras, they go, no, didn't you see the movie? And that's how you get people like our current Secretary of State, who wanders around babbling to the Iranians, to Hamas, to Hezbollah, no idea about the real world. They have no idea about the dangers of Venezuelan gangs coming into America. They have no idea about the danger of flash mobs looting stores. And so I think you have to recognize that there is built into modern liberalism an inability to deal with the real world. Now, in the real world, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
If you have enemies, you better be stronger than they are. Because if you're stronger than they won't do anything and you will have peace. But if they think you're weak, you will have war and you may be conquered. People should look at footage of Beirut or of Gaza or of Ukraine and understand this could be America. We're not guaranteed that we get to sidestep history. And the only thing that will protect us is to be strong. And to be strong, we have to profoundly overhaul the Defense Department, the Homeland Security Department, and the intelligence agencies.
Yeah, I mean, you used the example of the Secretary of State, who's an incompetent. He's one of the adults that was supposedly going to be back in charge, but his actions clearly show that that wasn't the case. But you mentioned the DOD, and you're right. What about General Milley? Calling China, be like, listen, if there's ever anything, I'll let you know before America possibly. I mean, to me, it seems just treasonous. But if it's not treasonous, it's certainly incompetent. That you would warn your greatest adversary about anything that you're going to possibly do in the event that something happened in Taiwan. I mean, I can't even imagine that these people could possibly ascend to power, but that's how bad it's gotten. That to become a 3- and 4-star general, you actually have to be a bureaucrat and a politician, not a war fighter, because they've been politicized and those roles are entirely political now, not anything to do with capability or military preparedness.
Yeah, I think you've got to go back to setting standards and setting objectives, promoting people who achieve those standards and those objectives. In the case of Milley, I can't for the life of me understand how he's gotten by. First of all, he was in charge of Afghanistan. It was totally disastrously mishandled. Second, he said publicly, he thought the Russians would be in Kyiv in 3 days. They're still not in Kyiv. He paid no consequences. And third, as you point out, I don't understand, under our Constitution and under the rule of law, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs can, without the president's permission, talk to the head of the Chinese military and reassure them as though he was on China's side against the president of the United States. I mean, I'm an Army brat. My dad's
Listen, part of Trump's negotiation is that you don't know where he's coming from. You think he's an unknown entity. There's not a playbook. Milley literally took that off the table. Part of it is like, well, we just don't know what Trump's going to do because he's unpredictable. Unlike, everyone else who, they have a playbook. I'm sure the Chinese have stolen it and probably know it, back and front. Trump was different. He kept people on their toes. It's why you didn't have Russia invading their allies under Trump. It's why China wasn't playing those games. It's why North Korea stopped launching missiles across Japan. And that seems like a no-brainer, and yet he did it. And there's no consequence. There's no penalty. I mean, I would imagine if someone did that under a Trump administration who was a conservative general and did something, the opposite, they'd be court-martialed in about 2 seconds, and they'd be out on their ass.
That's right. And I think it's, if people will just think through the concept that you have the senior general in the American military take it on his shoulders
Yeah.
to circumvent the constitutional commander-in-chief. Remember, the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution under the leadership of George Washington, who had been a commander-in-chief. When they put in commander-in-chief, they meant it.
Yeah.
And to have Milley violate the line of authority
Yeah.
is, I think, extraordinary. I don't know any parallel to it.
Well, the same people who don't know what a woman is don't understand the meaning of commander-in-chief. So that's a problem. So maybe to fix those problems, what do you think the minute number one priorities? Noon, 12:01, January 20th, 2025. What are the minute one priorities? And then what do you think are the first 100-day priorities for the second Trump administration?
That's a big jump. Look, the number one priority.
We got like 4 hours, dude. Have at it. Yeah.
The number one priority, the very first day, is close the border. Period. Yeah. Issue the orders immediately. Have it happening by 5 o'clock that afternoon, and immediately people will be responsive and say, he's keeping his word. We're getting things done. Second, I think they have to have, and I worry about this candidly. They have to have a strategic communications plan which recruits the American people and gets the American people engaged. For example, if virtually every American sometime in the next 6 to 9 months sends in an idea to Vivek and to Elon and says, here's a way we can fix this.
Yeah.
And I hope they'll submit a whole series of rolling reports as rapidly as they can and not wait around to write some big report that nobody will read. I think then you begin to get a momentum. And then third, you've got to, I cannot overstate this, you have got to get the tax bill done.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and I'm not a lawyer, so I've been asking some people to study this. I believe that the Supreme Court decision about bureaucracy probably means that the president could issue an executive order the first day that says none of the following regulations will be considered binding because all of them are in violation of the Supreme Court.
I love that.
And I think that could be the largest single deregulatory step ever taken in American history. Now, again, we have people studying it, but I have a hunch that that's technically correct. So I would want him to be decisive, clear, direct. And then, frankly, I have enormous faith in your father. I think he does have a strategy for Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I would like, I hope that he will execute that as early as he can. He'll save a lot of lives. And in the long run, make a big step towards a safer and more peaceful world.
I think that's right. I think another step that sort of be interesting. I know I literally saw something. Again, I don't know if it's accurate, but it seemed accurate. Like, there was a receipt, an expenditure that had to be taken where the DoD bought an industrialized size shredder so they could shred whatever documents are out there. So I'd like to create an incentive system for the door kickers in the military, the guys that are doing the work that have been exposed to this nonsense, to be whistleblowers against the nonsense that was going on in the higher ups, so that we can actually, again, expose that to the American public so they can see what's actually been going on, because I think that'd be another important one for everyone to see. We want to just have the utmost transparency.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, the principle that you have to educate and inform the American people, at which point they will render judgment. There's a great line by Joseph Paterno, who was a Democratic politician many, many years ago, wrote a book called The Election Game and How to Win It. And, I'm sorry, Joseph Napolitan. And he said, never underestimate the intelligence of the American people, nor overestimate the amount of information they have. And his point was, you give them the information.
Dude, I can't feel my face.
Make very solid decisions, but they're not necessarily going to go out on their own. So I think a very big part of this administration for the first 6 months has to be making sure that the average American gets to realize how really, really bad it's been and how really much has to change. And if that happens, then we'll be riding a wave of public outrage and public indignation. And at that point, we'll be in a position, I think, to win huge victories in the Senate and the House. And we'll have a bunch of Democrats vote with us.
I think that's right. So more broadly, Nuno, I've been talking a lot about this sort of the MAGA cultural, movement. Reagan once joked, you can tell a lot about a man's character by the way he eats jelly beans. I sort of feel the same way with my father and McDonald's. I was the guy that sort of coined, like 20 years ago, I called him, the blue collar billionaire, and people were like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. I was like, no, he gets it. He understands real people because, while he may be a bit of a showman here and a little glitzy here, when he's at home, his happy place is sort of, eating a burger and watching a ball game. Can you talk a little bit about that cultural shift in the Republican Party and how we can carry out this MAGA mission?
Look, part of the reason you ended up with some never Trumpers was they joined the Republican Party to get away from all that.
Yeah.
They wanted to go to fancy five-star restaurants and they wanted to be surrounded by people who were nice. And they thought all those people who were serving them had to be Democrats because they didn't want to get associated with them. And I've known your dad long enough to know that, in fact, and I always tell people, you tell me if you think this is right. I always tell people, one of the real keys is that he was a construction real estate guy more than a finance real estate guy.
Yep.
And he's out there actually building things, talking to blue-collar workers for his entire career.
I say it all the time. That's how he was better because he listened to the guys on the job site. He spent time with them. He valued their opinion. Perhaps in many cases, much more so than some executive, in an office behind an Excel spreadsheet. So, that's how he knew how to communicate with those guys. That's how he was like them because he actually, he made a lot of money listening to them, taking their advice. And so he trusts their advice as much as the quote unquote experts who, frankly, haven't exactly been expert in getting things right over the last few decades.
I think that's right. So I think part of, and I've always felt this about him, I used to tell reporters when they were first trying to come to grips with it, that if The Apprentice had been on PBS immediately after Downton Abbey, they would have understood Trump. But because The Apprentice was on a commercial station, not a single political reporter in Washington had ever watched it. So they had no idea that in 14 years, he had mastered television at a level unlike anybody else. I mean, he understood television as well or better than Reagan understood movies.
Yeah.
And nobody understood that. Well, he hasn't lost any of that touch, which I think is really interesting. He spent the years in the White House. He spent the years having people try to destroy him. And yet, when I've been with him and I've watched him, his natural interaction with people, his natural curiosity. There's this great series that Oprah did years ago where your dad agreed to do all the different jobs at his hotel in Chicago. And so he's dressed like a bellman, and he's dressed like a waiter, and he's doing all this stuff. And you can tell he's having a ball. I mean, he thinks it's fun to be out here doing different things. You got the same thing out of the garbage truck. I mean, I think deep down he thought this was a kick and a lot better than normal campaigning. And of course, coming in wearing the vest, and he managed to take that vest and turn it into a 20-minute riff.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's another politician in America who could have done it.
Yeah, he talks with the American people, not at them, and that seems to be a big difference between him and so many of the other people out there. So, Mr. Speaker, Newt Gingrich, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, guys. When Newt talks, listen, because this is a man who's done it all and gets it. So we really appreciate you always being there, Newt. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Take care.
Be well. Well, guys, thank you for tuning in. As always, remember to like, share, subscribe. Check out our incredible sponsors. Go to 5gfree.com/triggered. Okay, that way you get 15% off your order at checkout, or you can use promo code TRIGGERED, like the name of the show. And visit tnusa.com/Don Jr. It's down there at the bottom of the screen there. You can click on the link, but visit tnusa.com/DONJR for a free consultation at Tax Network USA to make sure you don't make any mistakes with the IRS. Remember, guys, they're not your friends, but like, share, subscribe, send it to your friends. Make sure they see what's going on. Make sure they're in on the loop. Luckily, well, I don't know, luckily or not, I get to